Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Sean Carey, and I'm with.
Dr. Bill Moss.
And we wanted to do a special episode today. We want to talk a little bit about more kind of world events. And it feels like the world is on this place of great change. And I feel like I'm going through that with my own life.
Mhm.
And Bill, I feel like you're going that through with your life too. So it just seemed like it would be a good thing to talk about tonight.
Yeah, we were kind of joking, like, let's talk about politics. And the
Yeah.
reality is, um, we're going to be talking about a lot of, not us personally, the world's going to be talking about a lot of world events. But, you know, when there's a lot of change going on in the collective, a lot of times individually, we're also going through a lot of shifts and changes and challenges in our own life. So, we thought that would be an appropriate. Well, you thought it would be appropriate, and I was like, let's do it, to kind of
Yeah.
talk about what that even looks like from it's almost like a microcosm, macrocosm kind of discussion, but it's also necessary. And we've touched upon this idea in other episodes, but I think, with this one, we're going to really dive into what change means and how that relates to healing in ourselves and others.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for a bit more background. So in the past 2 weeks, we basically had there's the attempted assassination for Trump. Then yesterday, Biden announced that he was not going to be on the ballot for this
Mhm.
coming election. And then, so that was yesterday. And then on Sunday, we had or I'm sorry, on Friday, we had a global IT infrastructure like meltdown. Like
Oh
around
yeah.
the chains around the world, the London Stock Exchange was down. Like computers were down all over the world. And
Mm.
it's like, wow, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And
Were you affected by any of that, the digital stuff?
I wasn't my IT guy let me know that that was going on, but I do the energy work on Friday, so I don't need the computer systems the same way as
Yeah,
with the chiropractic practice.
me too.
So yeah, it didn't really affect us. We came back on Monday and everything was going on, but people were stranded in flights across the country. I have different friends posting on Facebook being like, I'm finally able to get a flight after 3 days, and
Ye
so those are like several big events in a very short period of time, and it feels like the world is changing so fast.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we have this idea that we're just going to stand still and, we'll have like our little utopia.
Mhm.
But it doesn't really work that way. The world is always changing. The universe is always changing. Change is one of the constants of the universe.
Yeah.
So we need to change. Like we need to change as well. Otherwise, we get left behind in a certain sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the simplest level, that's probably the best thing to keep in mind is, like, by actually doing nothing, you go backwards. You
Yeah.
don't change forwards. If you don't clean up your room, or if you don't ever clean up your room, it's not going to stay to the extent that it was when it was clean. It starts to get kind of messier. So I think it's always perspective is really important when it comes into um, when you are making a change, right? And health is one of those areas that, we as healers, um I think we start to help people look at how their change affects their overall well-being, right? Like, any choice you make to make a change is going to influence your life, and not all of the change is so obvious, right? There's
Yeah.
a lot of people upset about every piece that's going on, but
Yeah.
what we don't realize is, like, at the other end of this, it could be a much better scenario situation in our leadership and the economy. And, people have many opinions of, no, it's not, because we're being controlled and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, in our own life, there's been many choices that we gave up, and it seemed like a hard change and we weren't going to like it. And then at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it was like, you look back and you can see how, like, there's 10 different steps beyond that were beneficial because of the one that was made.
Yeah, 100%. And even with the way the world is changing right now, like with things like AI, I'm not somebody who naturally loves technology, and it's something that it's been kind of like something that I've had to really work on overcoming and starting to lean into technology and the shifts of it more.
Yeah.
And like with AI, it's like that's a huge conversation point with people where it's like it is changing the game so fast. And I'm really kind of enjoying how things are developing with it because I'm leaning it into it more and working on, we're using some different AI processes for this podcast.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun to like play around and to lean into some of the change that's happening because it's
Should we tell them the secret that I'm actually an AI and I'm not a real person?
we should. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know what's funny? You haven't hit 40 yet, but I hit 40. And I remember in my 40th year of life having this reflection all of a sudden where I was like, oh shit, I really don't want to change. Like
Yeah.
there were certain systems in my office, there were patterns, there's equipment, software, marketing
Yeah.
strategies, all that stuff. And the world changes a lot. And all of a sudden I remember feeling the rigidity of like, oh my gosh, I've actually gotten kind of not stuck in some ways, stuck in certain ways and processes. And I realized like that's what happens. And I don't know when that is for each person, but I actually had the realization like, oh, I'm actually becoming rigid in the way I do things,
Yeah.
and witnessing how people just stop. And I think there's parts of development where you're like, this is a good thing and I don't need to change that. It's working.
Yeah.
It might, I might get better at it. Say it's public speaking, networking, any of those things aren't going away. The human condition is always going to be important. But I just realized, like you said, with technology and platforms and things, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to change. I don't want to change anymore. But because I did that in the last couple of years, I have made some shifts in my business and even in my like self-care routines that have been different in the last couple of years that have been really helpful that I wasn't doing
Yeah.
prior to. Yeah.
Same for me too. And there's a way that we can lean into the change a little bit more, I think, that than is normal for humans to do.
Mhm.
That when we are leaning into the change and you still hold on to your foundation, but you can use it to really make huge leaps forward in a short period of time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, on the collective, look how much in 2 weeks, like
Yeah.
planned or unplanned, it all is definitely going to be like even you saying it when you sit back and you relax and look at like a week's time, you're like,
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are like pretty major events in a very short period of time.
Yeah. And that's messy, right?
Yeah.
We've had, I think that's what I think life work, chiropractic healing in general, there's always those points where all of a sudden you feel like you did too much or you're doing too much or
Yeah.
I can't handle much I handle much more of this change. And I think one of the themes we've been talking about is one of the ways I personally have combated that has been, there's this saying like I want to work hard and play hard, but we were talking about
Oh,
it the
yeah.
other day. It was like, we work very hard and when you work with clients in a healing world, you work from a different place. You're working
Yeah.
on in different ways, like to hold space for people. It's
Yeah.
like, supporting your friend who's going through a lot. Like sometimes that weighs on you, but when you're a healer and you're doing healing work, you're working within people's stuff, right? That's the best
Yeah.
way. So like playing hard actually doesn't help me anymore. It's
Yeah.
like resting hard
Yeah.
is what really helps me. Restoring hard, if you will, has been the thing that helps me. So when it gets crazy or I'm taking on a lot to balance that, I have personally found that I have to, you know, counter it with the almost the opposite. And I didn't know what that opposite was for me, but it does have a lot more to do with like being away from people, being in
Yeah.
nature, being with my family, to handle those major s- uh, shifts that often are choices,
Yeah.
but sometimes just come about.
Yeah. Yeah, we were having conversation on Sunday, and during that conversation, I was on the phone. I was going on a hike with my dog through the woods, and it's like, yeah, I'm just really excited. I'm reading this book that I'm really enjoying, and
Yeah.
then when I'm barbecuing, and it's just like kind of the perfect day. But it was very much like my version of self care. There's something that works for me where it is kind of a bit more introverted and recharging because I've been maybe 9 or 10 days in a row of doing a lot of helping people. Like I taught a class over the weekend. I had different energy clients,
Mhm.
the chiropractic practice, and it would just end up being like kind of a 2 week stretch almost. And I needed that time to recuperate.
Yeah, I actually had the exact same thing where, like, we
Yeah,
hosted, the Insophic Reiki program for 3 days last weekend over, mid-July, and that creates a, "Okay, I'm practicing 4 days straight. I'm hosting this," and I went in a week later, I realized what I needed was, like, I needed to cancel my any Monday clients I had
yeah,
to take a day of rest, and then this weekend, I was very, uh, purposeful of taking more time, and I had originally planned to teach a class this coming weekend, and I was like, "Whoa." Old me would have just done all this stuff, and it would have been, like,
yeah,
half-assed. Some of it would have been good, some of it would have been trash, but, you know, based on the weight of everything we're taking on, I made changes that I know are gonna sustain me for, like, the long run,
yeah,
and that's the thing about working with clients. I think the old school mentality, at least in chiropractic, was like, see more people, serve more people. And then, like, you don't serve yourself, you don't
yeah,
serve your family, you don't serve your longevity,
yeah,
um, by adapting to the change that is occurring. And I know I was a sucker for other people's visions with that
yeah,
and what it means to be successful and driven. And now I'm like trying to create more space as I go, because the world's stuff is more complex. And like you said, over the last couple weeks, um, I'm sure you've noticed. What are some things you've noticed, like with the people you're working with? I feel like that's always relevant. It's like we're talking about this chaos in the world and quick
yeah.
change, and how's that showing up for the people that you're currently working with?
Well, I think people have been really stressed overall.
Yeah,
There's kind of that stress in the air. I think that there is also hope. Like when there is change, like
yeah,
a lot of change happening, there is also like hope of that energy of like, okay, something positive is out there.
hmm,
And so I'm kind of seeing that reflected in my clients, both the challenge aspect and the potential. And there's a lot of change happening externally, as far as that relaxed hard piece, we also need to be able to change internally.
mm,
Like if the whole world is changing around you and you're not taking any time to change within, like
yeah,
that change within, it's not something that just happens. Like we have to go through a process. Quickly, and you're just kind of like having this prayer, I release the old, and I'm in line with perfect flow or whatever it is. But typically it's like having to release the old emotional, the rigid thought patterns, all these different pieces that are stagnant or stuck. And we need that time within to just, like I do anyway. I need that
mm.
time within to just relax and integrate, and then kind of lean into what is next for me, what change is coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice, because it's to go inside and to go internal and to get really quiet when it's seems more like a storm, because we're speaking in somewhat generalizations, but I think the easiest thing to do is to get caught up in the
Yeah,
chaos, and then we feel it internally. We're like, because there's so many unknowns, right? It's like you don't know the outcome of where things are going
yeah,
to go. And I think that's where some of the conspiracy world that has occurred over the last couple of years is it gets people in this state of like anxiety and like
yeah,
worrying and dwelling on like being out of control, and I can't do anything, and this is going to turn out really bad. And I think that creates like such a higher level of angst in people. And I'm sure you've seen this. I've seen this in clients, and they
yeah,
want to keep reliving something that they don't even know is going to happen. So when that external change happens very drastically, I think that's probably the best. I think it's one of the best recommendations that somebody can do is like get quiet internally,
yeah,
because if you can come to a peaceful center, you
yeah.
start to be like, well, then for you, it is the world is peaceful, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you start to put more of that out there because, like you said, I think there is this amount of hope that it, a large amount of hope that it starts to exist when things are changing.
yeah.
You know,
I remember reading a book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Have you ever read that one?
I not that I recall. I think I have it, and a couple of my professors recommended it, but I don't believe I ever read it.
It's a cool book. It's like it's shorter, and it was this guy who was, I believe he was a Jewish psychologist, and
Mm,
he ended up being enslaved in Nazi Germany. Like he went to one of the camps there, and he talked about his experience where like there was so much suffering and a lot of atrocities,
mm,
and going through like all this external stuff that was seemingly beyond his control. And it
mm,
really was like it was, he's this the guy's, in a camp, so uh, almost a slave, and there was very few choices available. But he was really going in and finding like what the experience could teach him,
mm,
had gratitude for each day, for each moment, and then really appreciating the small choices that he did have. And
mm.
he found peace and joy like in this terrible situation. And it's a really incredible book that's inspired a lot of people because you're like, okay, if he can do it in in that situation, in that extreme, like,
Mhm.
I can do it with stuff going on in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely need a lot more of that. I mean, I think that's why we love these stories and why books take off,
Yeah,
but that's a great example. And I love hearing those stories that um kind of put your life into perspective, right? Because
yeah,
another thing we were talking about this past weekend is like I'm coming up on some big shifts and things
yeah,
I'm gonna be doing, and it's like just to remain present and in the moment, things
yeah,
don't feel as overwhelming. And I know I got caught up in the last in 2000, we had
yeah,
scenario after scenario, and it was really easy to like future pace yourself into being like, what's this world gonna be like for my child? And that just
yeah,
isn't a good place to live. It's like a
yeah,
good state to be in is, like, just taking care of my child now in this
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
where I have a choice to make it better.
yeah,
But also with the hope of it being better. And, when we're talking about a healing journey, that's kind of like a good strategy, like a mental strategy
absolutely.
is to like be
Yeah,
where you are, surrender to kind of the moment, become present and aware and accept, but then also hold in your mind and your being that like things can get better because
yeah,
the people that are successful in healing are the ones that do know things can get better and
yeah,
lean into that, right?
yeah. 100%. As a healing client, when you're going through something, I've had many patients who've been through the ringer, whether it's they've been through multiple surgeries and many different medications and many different doctors and types of
Mhm,
healing, and they were still really suffering.
mhm.
And some of those clients like got better under care, and it was an
Yeah,
amazing thing to see. But one of the things that amazed me too, like with them, was sitting down with them, and this person was like, you're like their fifth chiropractor, or
yeah,
that type of thing. It's like they're still hoping. They're
yeah.
still trying all these things. They haven't given up hope. They haven't just like accepted defeat. They're like, no, I know it can be better than this.
And I started the new client today in chiropractic, and she's like 73. She's seen a couple orthopedics. They've done multiple steroid injections in her lower back, I mean, I took a picture of her X-ray, and basically they were like, the next round is surgery and that sort of thing. And her left leg wasn't working really well, sciatic nerve. And I took some pictures of her low back, and on paper her low back does not look good. Like
Yeah,
it's like a scoliosis, a significant curvature, tons of degeneration. Like it just doesn't look great, right? But in my experience over time, I don't put limits on people. I had this 86-year-old gentleman
yeah,
a couple months ago, and he came in a wheelchair, and in 2 weeks he went from walker to cane. And his low back also looked like trash. And
yeah,
I don't even know how much he thought I was gonna change, but it did change. So it's like,
yeah,
why would I be the doctor to not hold that hope? And that's usually what I'm looking for. Like today, so she got her first adjustment and she's leaving and she's moving her body, and I could see the twinkle that she was like, I can move differently.
yeah,
Not like you took away all my pain and you're like, that's
yeah,
not even like the point. But she could tell she can move better. And if somebody can move better, like it already showed that there was change. So probably like, I'm sure you did this. The thing I want to see with people the most is just like this shift in awareness. Um, because if we didn't bring them into that, like that there is hope. If I just said your low back's trash and it's not going to change because it's degenerated and that's the way it's going to be, like who the heck knows if she could have even seen what was actually happening in her physiology afterwards.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we have to be able to have little wins too that build upon other ones. So,
Yeah. Yeah. If you focus on the negative and what's going wrong all the time, it really does kind of grow. And
yeah.
it's like there's always more to complain about. There's always more to be frustrated about. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can also flip the switch and be in gratitude and be in hope.
Yeah, it's probably the number one thing for making progress on a
Yeah.
healing journey is if you can't look and see or find the difference, like you need to go find either look within and look at yourself because maybe there's something you aren't ready to see,
Yeah.
or you got to find somebody that's going to help you find it and work with them because that's in my opinion. I had a guy 2 weeks ago. I could tell he was giving my staff a bunch of trouble. He was like, when one sentence, like agreeing that this is going to take time. And I get that. And I've been
Yeah.
this way forever. But then his actions were, I need you to fix this right now. And I was
Yeah.
like, this isn't going to work because I'm never going to be able to help you experience those little nudges towards better. And that's a big thing because many people with the change in the world, they're like, they can't see any of this for the better, and therefore
Yeah.
it's never going to be better for them.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to hold out hope for that better world and for our life to be better.
Mhm.
And it's something that I think it's really part of the human condition that it's very easy to get stuck in negativity, especially if you're in severe pain or there's extreme circumstances
Oh,
going on.
without a doubt.
Yeah, it's so easy
We're
to fall into that trap, and we fall into that trap at different times. And but when that's going
you're
on,
you're never dramatic about it, right?
right? Yeah, it's like yeah, I'll just be in this like self-imposed state of misery,
The
But
man
it's
flu is like a real thing, right?
yeah, but it really is. It's like we do that to ourselves in a certain point. Like there's a challenge, there's an obstacle going on, and sometimes it's really really difficult stuff. And a year ago, 2 years ago, both my parents went through cancer.
Mhm.
And during that time, my mom beat cancer, and then she ended up having a hip surgery for a hip replacement that hadn't gone well. And she was really like struggling after the surgery. So she was in the hospital for like maybe a month and lots of pain, lots of difficulty. Like her quality of life wasn't great. And I remember talking to her, and I was like, "Mom, you really have to focus on like gratitude."
Mhm.
Because she didn't like where the hospital she was. She really didn't like the doctor that she was working with, and it was like
Mhm.
one thing after another, and just got caught into this cycle.
Mhm.
And when somebody's going through that, like, it happens to all of us. That those events just don't go well. It's kind of one after the other. But we
Yeah.
have to pick ourselves up, or you have to be around like an environment that will pick you up,
Mhm.
because that's what shifts us forward to the change being positive,
Mm.
to entering that new and better version of reality for ourselves.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that. So I feel like I got a lot of stories today. I had another client came in and this is sometimes like we've talked about energy healing work and life activation. Sometimes it's hard to like depict what these things can do, but
Yeah.
I had a client I did a life activation for two weeks ago, and she's also a chiropractic client, and she came in today and she's like, she had already scheduled another session. So, obviously she's like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about that activation." And what's the first thing like we do is when people are like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this thing." I'm
Oh
like,
yeah, there's some crisis in that they think we caused
like,
it.
what's the problem? I'm like, what's the
Yeah,
problem? I was like, yeah, we can schedule a time to talk. And then I'm like, what's the problem? So
yeah,
on her way out, she gave me kind of a more of a tidbit about it. And she basically pulls her phone out and she shows me these four, they're like quilts that she sewed or put together in these patterns with her grandchildren's name on them. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's cool that you made them. She goes, no, her husband had passed away 2 years ago and she started the project right around them. right around then. And then today, she's like, these four are completed, and this fifth one is like almost done. And she goes, they sat not being worked on for over 2 years, and she's like, I've completed them in basically 2 weeks. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, I was like, okay, so you want to, and that's not all she wanted to tell me. So I'm excited to hear
Yeah.
more of what she's reflecting on her journey. But she, um, is ready to move, right? And move
Yeah.
in a better direction. And you don't know how that's going to show up, but it was like really hopeful. And people tend to, we've been talking a lot about hope here. That's, I think, one of the greatest gifts that the light work gives people is there
Yeah.
seems to be a new seed of hope in what their potential actually is,
Yeah.
no matter where they are. And that's where the difference lies, right? People are
Yeah.
starting at different points. Some people have lived, so there's people who've lived like almost 100 years, and they see what's going on today, and they're like, "Pff, it's a different
Yeah.
iteration of some of the same stuff I've dealt with many times over,
Yeah.
throughout time." And then you have people who are in younger, and are like, this is crazy, how's the world like this? And now we haven't lived tons of years, but we've at least experienced enough to be like, okay, this is going to create some change, and we're
Yeah.
going to learn from it and grow, and hopefully we can make a different choice. So
Yeah. Yeah. And this phase of like this too shall pass, because
yeah.
everything passes, right? The good and the bad, it all there's changes that constant.
Yeah.
I love talking about people doing the energy healing as far as the hope it brings in too, because I think it's one of the, I don't want to say tangible because hope isn't really tangible, but it is something that happens across the board for people that I typically see, is
Yeah.
that they do feel more hopeful.
Hmm.
Typically, the energy healings help people to have more clarity and more hope, because
Hmm.
we talk about it brings in positive energy, it brings in light that wasn't there before.
Hmm.
Really, light is hope, light is love, light is clarity. So,
Hmm.
like, it really helps somebody to have those woken up at a deeper level.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not always like, I need to talk to you about this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah. And it's nice to see that, because we like to think people can always, they can become aware and start to kind of see. Because I know, even for myself, like I view the world in many different ways than I used to. And that probably viewing and becoming an observer is one of the better things that the world and the collective can become, instead of taking on opinions and emotional states about what you believe or whatnot, just observing what's happening, and that's where I like to see where people are. Are they observing? Are they jumping in? Are they getting all riled up about it? Because you have to be able to witness yourself in the healing journey, and just be like, well, this is where I am, because it's really
yeah,
easy to mistake healing sensations for um, other symptoms, right? That's like a good differentiator that I'm sure you
yeah,
see with too,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And whether it's when something's shifting, when we're going through a transition, one of the things that happens is it might kick up fear, and might kick up anxiety or doubt or grief, or
Mhm,
those things, like on the emotion and soul level.
mhm,
But those might be chances for you to actually let go of that stuff that's been there for a long time. And then physically too, for like I'm doing a parasite cleanse right now.
cool.
And yeah, I've been like a little bit more tired today for the past couple days while I'm doing this cleanse. And I've also had some like kind of like weird aches that I don't normally have, like
Mhm,
in my fingers and stuff. Like I haven't had aches in my fingers forever.
mm, mm,
But I was like, oh, there's something clearing out of my system, and it's
mm,
it's uncomfortable. Like there's
mhm,
definitely an uncomfortable aspect to the process, but because of the reactions that I'm experiencing, I'm like, oh, there's something, like I can feel something clearing out. I
mhm.
can feel that there's this discomfort here that's actually serving me because there's something that was stuck.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe some of the change we're talking about. It's like a detoxification,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and if you don't take a bigger look at the whole situation, it's really easy to be like, "Oh, this is just a problem." Like,
yeah,
we're really that's why I like sport and exercise and training, because you kind of like train yourself to get your butt kicked a little bit, right?
yeah,
And that's where the growth is. We've talked about that many times, but it's like it's good for people to make change in their health to like see what works. Beyond like that didn't make me feel good. Like, oh, I fasted for a day and I didn't like it. Well, how did you feel after a week? You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
after you did the fast, how were you days afterwards? Because
Yeah.
it's not easy. And then if you make any of those other changes, like in the moment, some of those totally suck. Parasite cleanses and
Totally, totally,
yeah.
and, yeah, the detoxification process is, like, when you're in the midst of change, when there's a lot happening externally,
Mm,
like, we really do need to, figure out what it is that we need to shift to and what we need to detox and let go of, and,
yeah.
like the story you just shared with that woman where her husband had passed and then she let those quilts just sit there, like, she had to let go of something to
Mm,
be able to, she had to let go of some resistance. She had to let go of some apathy, some stuckness, probably some grief to be able
yep.
to just move forward and say, you know what, like this has meaning to me. I want to pass these to my kids or grandkids.
Mhm,
And, and it's like she had to let go of the heavier stuff to bring more of that hope and that passion for life back in.
mhm.
And then that created a totally different outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like you hinted upon this concept of most people that end up getting the best results with change are the ones that are ready for like the details we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
They're ready for kind of the whole picture of like it's going to be hard, it's going to be ups and downs, but I'm willing to make it. It's and you see that with people who really know like they need to lose a lot of weight, right? Or like
Yeah.
because that's not going to be easy, or somebody who really needs to get sober and they've come to the
Yeah.
end because they're like it's affecting X, Y, and Z, and at this point, I know that I'm going to go through a lot of ups and downs to achieve that other thing. Or, whatever behavior it is over time, it's like the
Yeah.
reality of the change that's going to occur is it's going to have its challenges over time. And I think like part of what this show does for people is it looks at the vast ways that healing is a process, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
I think we hit a culture like 30 years ago where it's like, I have this problem. Okay, here's this thing to like get it rid of it in the moment or clear it up or whatnot.
Yeah.
And there's a self accountability that's arisen based on people being like, well, you know what? Maybe I should be more responsible for knowing what's in my food, knowing what I'm
Yeah.
putting in my body, what I'm choosing to put in or not. So I think like the world is coming into awareness that this process kind of applies to everything, this healing process.
It does. It's certainly like this alchemical cycle that we're going through, and that I think we go through many times in our lives through different processes.
Yeah, and probably many times after that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That journey of alchemy of transformation,
Mhm,
and with healing, it's really highlighted, and it's one of those things that it can really cause somebody to change when there's a healing crisis,
mhm,
whether it's mental health or whether it's physical health. Like that can really cause somebody to change.
mhm.
Somebody has a terrible diet and then they have a heart attack and they make it, and then they make the change, or they
Yeah,
get a cancer diagnosis and then they make the change.
yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that's not a bad like, nobody ever wants that news, but we all know hero stories where somebody got something like that. They faced it,
Mhm.
they made all kinds of changes, and then there's plenty of speakers and books and stuff that came right out of that exact case that you're describing.
Yeah,
Um, and sometimes it's like, we don't want to live in fear, like, well, I better make this change. So I avoid those things because that holds this tight energy of like you're just trying to avoid the
yeah,
potentials of doom in the life, but none of us make it out of this physical world whole. So that's not a good place to really work
yeah,
from either. So then it comes down to kind of our habits, right? And sticking to
yeah,
them beyond how we feel. And that's how we consistently make changes through like disciplined action in ways that some days feel good and some days don't. And I the busier I am, the more I struggle with some of that as far as healthy habits are
yeah.
concerned as well.
And the more important it is too, and it's the same for me. It's like the more important it is, and do you know it? And it's also like, oh, but there's just so many hours in the day.
Yeah. Like, I like to think if I just didn't have to worry about working or whatnot, like, I would just fit all the things in that I value and view as, like, important for my health, and it would all just go
Yeah.
well, and I'm like, there's some I'm like, I wouldn't do it. Like, there wouldn't even be this, like, catalyst to do it. It's almost like when it's harder to get done, sometimes it becomes more important. Um,
Yeah.
but if I just had freedom to kind of put whatever into my schedule, like, no, most of it wouldn't even work.
Yeah, I'm so much more productive even with the self-care stuff when I actually have the, like, basically meditation,
Yeah.
exercise, that type of thing, typically
Yeah.
when I have my regular schedule.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Um, I agree. I agree 100%. But like the starting of those practices and I think that's the other thing is like people think when you do healthier activities, they bring about ease
Yeah.
with use. And I think like getting up early when you make that change, like you think people that get up early just love it. It's like butterflies and glitter at 5 a.m. And I love I will say I love the morning. I love getting up early, but it
Yes.
sucks every day. Like it's never
Yeah,
really that like joyful right away.
totally, totally.
I just
But
know I'm better at it, you know?
yeah. To switch gears just a little bit, one thing
Yeah.
I'd like to mention is that how when we're in this time where there's a lot of world change happening, so there's so much external change happening, it also creates more choices for people.
Mm,
So it's like we're in this time of more there's kind of more chaos going on, but there's also much more choice.
hmm.
So
It's good.
there's a lot more potentials where there can be, you can make shifts faster than you could before because there's so many different possibilities. Each
Mhm.
one could be kind of a different reality for you to step into, a different life. Like if you make those changes to your diet or meditation or exercise,
Mhm.
the life you'll be living 3 months from now is totally different. Eh,
Yeah.
but it's just with so much worldwide change happening, it's like I feel like that gets highlighted.
Mm, yeah. No, that's really good. Even kind of like the focused on the draw of like what it can be and what it will be.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Because who knows? Like, it is almost fun to dwell on the idea of like, I love the memes where this day and age, like you have things like AI and these self-driving cars and stuff. And when we were
yeah,
kids, that reality didn't seem like it could even come to be. So like the potentials and possibilities are kind of what drive us into that new and then that new phase too. And a lot of the tools you said are the drivers for a new change in your own health and your own healing in your own life.
yeah. Yeah, it's like we don't have to be victims to the world as far as what's going on externally. We really, no matter what's happening, we can we even if there's a lot of chaos going on, you can
Mhm.
simply kind of like be like, okay, this is a weird time. I'm going
Mm,
to go within and make whatever progress I can within, because
yeah,
I know that in doing that, when the world emerges through this period, that it's like I'm going to be my best self.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and part of being your best self is, like, kinda modeling that it can be done, like you
yeah,
said. I think that's really good because, um and actually, this episode's helping me serve as a reminder is, like, that's, where I wanna be in whatever the next couple months bring.
yeah,
I wanna be very grounded and stable and have mental clarity and, focus because, we do support people in so many different ways, and I
yeah,
think people should know that's why we have these conversations and that's why it's important to us is because we want to be that stable kind of pillar balanced person to help bring a better world. I mean,
yeah,
that's why this show kind of came about is because we want people to start to understand that their healing process and we're going through it with them and that we
yeah,
can also serve as an anchor point to um, kind of be exactly what you were describing, the change. It's cliche, but, um, being that change throughout the the crisis of change.
yeah. I think that both you and I really kind of see some of what's possible for the world in a good way.
Yeah.
And that acts as this inspiration to really work hard because there are a lot of people suffering. Like the current reality as far as what people are experiencing, it doesn't have to be what's going to be there in 2 years or five
Yeah.
years. Like
Yeah.
what we have the potential to experience is really so much better. but it
Yeah.
does take it takes a collective shift, and it takes us individually shifting to be that best self. And the more we can do that, hopefully the more we can act as a lighthouse to inspire somebody else to do that for them, and that person inspires somebody else, and we get there a whole lot faster.
Yeah, this will be like a good reference point episode to like look at in a year and or a year or
Yeah.
2 years or 3 years and be like, how did that how did that change we were going through result? I
Yeah.
hope it uh, is something positive worth talking about. And I'm sure what some ways it will be, and I'm sure in
Yeah.
other ways it won't be, but it will be neat to see like where we go from here as a collective. And how things shape out over the next couple. We'll probably be talking about stress on a lot of these episodes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's part of the human condition,
Yeah.
and at the same time, like, can you imagine if there was like 100 million people in this country who were just like so hopeful?
Mm,
Uh, it's like the impact of the energy we're choosing as we go through these changes. It has a mega impact.
big time.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like it really gets to change the like when I'm in a state of despair, if something's going on, I like it doesn't feel like I have choice.
Mhm.
Like I'm just like, it's like you're depressed, you have
Yeah.
despair, you feel apathetic. You're not like eating healthy food. You're eating junk food that makes you kind of get a sugar rush, so you feel better, get an emotional response. Like
Yeah.
it's very different than if you're like, I feel really hopeful, and then you're just flowing with all this creativity, all this inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great place and a great state to be in. I think you touched upon something that would be a really good episode. There's like tons of examples that are documented throughout time where groups have done really positive things and how they've influenced that area in a
Yeah.
really positive way. So it is bigger than we think it is when, as a unit, people start to be more hopeful, joyful, grateful. Like it really does shift on a collective, and it's just not a new agey thing to say. It's like it's been documented many times over that when
Yeah.
people come together in really positive ways, that other things start to happen in those areas. So I think that would be kind of cool to explore sometime.
Yeah, I think so too.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, as we kind of break down the anatomy of change, I guess, in the collective and the individual, we encourage you to reflect on like what practices are you doing in your life to kind of stay present throughout that time and to become quiet and grounded. One of the things we're going to be incorporating more and soon is having some online meditations and also developing some meditations to help support people through their healing process so they can become um, grounded, still, and ready for change, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd love to hear if you share your own stories about what's working well with you in the midst of change, what strategies are helpful. And then also like any types of meditations or things that we could create to help you. It would just help us a lot to know what you're going through, what challenges are, so that we can customize that for you, because we do have a lot of tools,
Mhm.
and it's something that we enjoy doing. So we'd love to help. We just need to know what you're interested in and what you need help with.